Hi, so I have another video. I got a question about how to identify sport-specific limitations. So the question was about hockey, how to identify limitations to my performance in hockey using NIRS, so in this case using the Moxy. This is a really interesting question, and I'm going to quickly talk about sports-specific, and then we'll try to go into hockey a little bit to answer the question. So, what for sure is if you're, what's for sure? Let's say what I think is that if you're going to try to find limitations to performance for a specific sport, then the testing data you use needs to be sport specific to find out that sport specific limitation. And that's not always that easy, especially if you're trying to gather physiological data. Which is why portable NIRS like the Moxys are useful, because you get physiological data and it can be applied in the field easily. So when we talk about limitations, people talk about people talk about limitations. They're talking about some kind of limiter to your performance. And when we're using the Moxy to identify that, what the Moxy does is it looks at oxygen supply and demand relationships. So what we're really looking at is limitations in one of those two parameters. So either the limitation to supply oxygen or the limitation of the muscle to actually then use the oxygen. And this kind of gets to this kind of VO2 balance. It's very the essence of VO2 is this supply and this demand of oxygen. And if you change the activity type, you will see, for example, in VO2 that you have different VO2 values. So VO2 isn't constant. If you're doing cycling and running, you're not going to have the same VO2 if you're cycling or running. So there's different things happening that changes the way that you're consuming oxygen. So either it's the actual consumption part or it's the supply part. So we're talking about which of those two are limiting. And that's why we get to why it's important to do things sport specifically if you're trying to find out that limitation, because it's not necessarily going to be the same. And this is where Moxy comes into play nicely. So you can use the Moxy to look at, well, what's happening to my supply and demand situation in my sport pretty easily. So do I see my oxygen curve going down, which means I'm demanding more than I'm supplying? And how far does it go down? Am I getting really low oxygenation values, or do my oxygenation values stay high? So if you have kind of flatter curves and higher values, it's kind of pointing toward this side of, okay, it looks like the supply, you're being able to supply, you're just not being able to utilize the oxygen in the muscle. Whereas if you have these very steep decreasing curves, very low values, it looks more in the other side of the spectrum. You're more, if I could supply more oxygen, that's what's going to benefit me most. So, and you can do that you essentially do that if you're doing some kind of ramp or step protocol, but you can also do that if you're doing some kind of interval-based protocol. So you're looking at, well, when I'm doing high-intensity bouts, so I'm doing on-ice hockey sprints, what's happening? And if I repeat those, the same thing happening over and over. Am I always using all my oxygen and it's depleting very quickly, and then my performance falls apart? We would look at, well, it looks like I'm probably supply limited. I need to somehow get more oxygen. Whereas if you have a player that's doing the same kind of max intensity sprints, but the curve may still drop quite rapidly, but it starts plateauing out at fairly high values, 30, 40, 50%. It's not dropping anymore, but max intensity starts falling apart. We're going to look at more, well, there appears to still be a fair amount of oxygen, and we know other players can decrease further. And maybe even that player can decrease further if you get them to do more very muscle-specific exercises, like you get them to do some kind of knee extensions. But in the activities in the sport themselves, in that muscle, it just seems to be an abundant supply in relationship to the demand. So I hope that answers the question, gets into the question of how to identify which limiter we're looking at, and that you can do that in a variety of different protocols. I think, I don't think there's one right protocol to do hockey tests, but I think if you're going to do a hockey test protocol, you should probably do it skating on ice and in some kind of interval format, because that's what hockey players do. Now, about the second part of the question is actually how they're worried about false positives. So basically, seeing some kind of values and then identifying some kind of limiter or some kind of limitation, that might not be true. And that's a real problem. We need to be careful of that. And you're probably never going to completely guarantee that you're not going to make a mistake out of analysis of a test. But what is nice with the Moxy is that you can actually retest a lot and easily. I mean, you just throw the Moxy test on. You throw the Moxy on when they're doing different skating drills. You throw the Moxy on, you get them to do some sprints, and you take a look. And if all the data points at, yes, this person can really desaturate, can really go to low values and very quickly, and has more troubles kind of recovering, then it looks like they're probably limited in their ability to supply oxygen. Or if you see this person never really coming down so far, recovering very quickly, not such steep downhill slopes, then it really looks like this person has more of a utilization of oxygen as being the limitation to performance. So if you want to avoid false positives, it's about collecting lots of data over and over and really being like, yes, this is the physiological picture of my athlete. And the Moxy or portable NIRS lets you do that easily. And it lets you do it a lot more than other tools. I mean, using VO2 to somehow come up with a training plan is a way as well. But what about false positives in VO2 testing? It's, you're testing maybe once, twice, 3 times a year and setting up a whole training program on that. So it's a valid question about false positives. And the best way to avoid it is you need to really try to get a physiological picture of your athlete by gathering more data. So you need a tool that's going to be easily and readily applied. I hope that helps. This video went a little bit long, so I hope people still enjoyed it, and I hope that answered the question. All right, thank you very much for watching. Another one up next week.